All right, I'm going to go ahead and start this. So, what I thought about doing was writing something about what happened to me earlier this year, but it was just no, there's too much good stuff. And writing, I just no. So, I'm just going to talk about it in a video. So, this is for those of you who are curious. This is really for me to self-indulge, I guess, about what happened. So, and some of you may just, watch this and enjoy seeing my beautiful face. I don't know. So, the week of Valentine's Day this year, 2022, it was Tuesday, so that was the 15th of February, the day after Valentine's Day. It's just another day. I went to work, got off work, blah, 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 ate my dinner. At night, I was getting laser to sleep just like any other night. I had some heartburn, which is not unusual. I eat a lot of spicy foods. So, heartburn is not a rare thing for me. But it was pretty intense right there. So I was like, I'm going to take my Zantac, I think it is. Yeah. Or whatever the generic version of Zantac is. So I took that. And then, as I said, I got laser to bed. That was about 9 p.m. Took my Zantac, got in bed, and was asleep because I'm old. So I was asleep by 10. And then 2 hours later, I woke up and the heartburn was still there, which is rare. And it was pretty painful. It woke me up. It was one of those things like I don't know if anybody else has this, when you're sick and you're sleeping, like the sickness kind of works its way into your dreams and then you wake up and you're like, ooh, something's bad. That's kind of what happened. So I woke up at midnight. And the heartburn was bad. And I was like, I gotta get up. So I was walking around. I came downstairs and was just trying to just let it recover, whatever. Prior to this, I would go to sleep and then I would wake up at 4 in the morning and be awake. So I would come down. This was earlier. So I came downstairs and it was pretty intense, right in the esophagus there area, but also in my lungs to some degree. So I started doing the Googling of my symptoms, which is always a good approach to really freak you the fuck out when you're not feeling well. And as I'm doing this, I'm like, because at this point it was heartburn and it hurt, but I didn't know what it was. So I'm looking it up, and it's like, if you've got recurring heart, and it's like you feel this, you should go. As I'm researching this, I'm like, I should probably get this looked at as soon as possible. This could be something more serious. So as I'm looking it up, I don't even remember the order of this, but things got more intense. And the only way I can describe the pain was, it felt like somebody was taking my lungs and squeezing them as hard as they could, and then letting them go, and then squeezing them again. That really hurt. So I was kind of wincing. I was on the floor. I was like, oh, fuck, that hurts. But in my mind, I'm like, this isn't good. I need to go get this looked at immediately. Work was stressful. But, I've been through work stress before. I've never had physical manifestations of stress to this degree. So I was like, something's going on here. I need to get it looked at. Worst case scenario, I'm fine, and I will not have to go to work tomorrow. But at the same time, I'm thinking, Denise and Laser are asleep. I don't want to scare them with this. I don't want to wake them up and make them, have to go to the hospital with me. We also had the COVID thing going on, so I didn't know if I just didn't know. Denise had been in the hospital a few months before to have a procedure done, and I could not be in there. So it was like, I'm going to have to go by myself. So I decided, I woke Denise up. I said, I'm having some chest pains. I'm going to have to go to the hospital. I'm taking myself to the emergency room, I think. And then I was like, yeah, I got to do this. And she was like, okay. And she was like waking up. And I was hoping she would just go back to sleep. She did not, obviously, because she was scared. As I was thinking about it, something else happened in terms of physically. I felt this burning sensation down my left and right arms. It was like burning, and that was like, ooh, that's something. I don't know what that is, but that's fucking bad. So once I told her that I was gonna go, I felt a little bit better, but it was still hurting, and I still felt weird. So I got out, I got in the car. This was like midnight, between midnight and 1, which, it used to not be that late, but to me it seemed like just uncharted territory. So I got in the car and I started driving, which, if you Google when you have chest related pain symptoms, you shouldn't be driving, but I did. So I got in the car and was driving, and I was like, I don't really remember how I got to the hospital. So I took a couple wrong turns, but that just kind of chilled me out. And then I found the hospital. I walked into the emergency room, and it was the Delray Medical Center emergency room's kind of similar to what I'm used to at the Anne Arundel one in Annapolis. There's like this outside area with like sofas and chairs and stuff. There were people sitting out there, and they looked like they had been there for a while, and they were like, ugh. So I was like, this could be a long night, but it's good that I'm here. I don't know why I thought it was good, because I don't know. So I went up and checked in. They were like, what are you here for? And I was like, I was having some chest pains, and I felt like I needed to get this looked at. They were like, here, fill out these forms. So I was like, okay. Filling out forms, and they're like, come here. They're like, we're going to do your blood pressure and all of that. So they did, and then they were like, you need to come with us now. So they took me back through the double doors into the actual emergency room area. They did not have any rooms open, so they had a gurney / cot in the hallway, like right behind where the nurse's station was. And they were like, you can just lie down there. This is your spot. Okay. So I get there and I sit down, and they come around and they hook me up with all this stuff. They make me, report all this stuff. They take my blood, they take my EKG, and I'm just sitting there. I'm like, I'm glad I'm here, but I don't know. It's just fluorescent lights. I'm in a hallway in an emergency room in the middle of the night. I'm going to see horrible things, and I don't really want to see that. And, but nothing really happened. That was the weird part. No, there weren't like car accidents and people coming in, which I thought would be the case. It was just kind of quiet, other than the fact that the people that were in the rooms kept screaming out and saying, like, kept trying to get out of bed to go to the bathroom, and the nurses had to yell at them and say, no, you're supposed to stay in bed, this blah, blah, blah. And the people are screaming about, oh, I'm going to shit on the floor, blah, blah, blah. This hospital was crazy. So I'm in the hallway, and I'm right next to the soiled utilities, I think it was, room, which is where all the hospital trash goes. So I'm right next to that. I'm like, all right. So they got me hooked up to stuff. Nobody's really saying anything. I hear people screaming and peeing and pooping on the floor. And then I'm like, I gotta go to the bathroom. So they're like, the bathroom's over there. I go in, the floor is covered in urine, and the toilet paper from the dispenser is just soaked in the urine. I'm like, oh, that's nice. Because I kind of smelled it from where I was staying. But just the whole thing smelled like urine. I was like, this is not the best place in the world. So I urinated, for those of you keeping score at home. And, I was hooked up to some machine. I went back to my thing. But I was like, this place is really gross. Yeah. So whoever the night doctor was like, well, we looked at your blood work, and there's some things we don't like on there, so we're going to keep you here for a little bit. We're going to take some more blood just to make sure everything's okay. I'm like, all right, whatever. I can't sleep because it's like I'm in a hallway and there are bright lights, and it's like, fuck. So I'm there, and people are coming in and out, but it's nothing really that bad, as I said. So I don't even remember the order of this, but at some point somebody lets me know, like, your cardiac enzymes in your blood are elevated. So that's why you're here. That's why we're keeping you here. And then, like, I was awake for the morning shift when, like, I think it was 5 or 6 a.m. when the morning crew came on. And I was like, what's going on? They were like, well, we're probably going to admit you because of your cardiac enzyme thing. We got to get that looked at. We're going to have a cardiologist here and all of that stuff. So, just sit tight here. I was like, okay. So then I was there for the switchover of the morning people coming in, and not really getting much feedback. One of the nurses was of Haitian descent, and I remember she had her cell phone kept going off, and she had really bad American country music playing on it, which she apparently was a fan of, which probably worse than what I was going through physically. So they keep taking blood. Every 2 hours they take blood from you if you're in the hospital. And so that kept happening. And not really getting much information. But then somebody eventually was like, we're going to admit you because of the enzyme levels are high. And I was like, okay. I was like, so what does that mean? They're like, well, we're just waiting for a bed to open up in the hospital so that we can take you up there. And I said, okay. COVID was kind of spiking. It wasn't too bad, but I knew that there were a lot of COVID cases in the hospital. So, which is why I had a mask on this whole time, which was just brutal. Because, I couldn't really breathe out of it. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, waiting and not really getting much information. Meanwhile, more people are coming into the emergency room, and they're all fucking crazy. Because I hear these old ladies screaming, and like the nurse comes in and they're like, why did you poop on the floor? Why did you do this? You don't have to do this. People pissing themselves, people trying to run out, people screaming about the conspiracy of the hospital trying to force them to stay here. I was like, what? It was crazy. And then that morning they offered me breakfast. I was like, I don't want to eat your hospital food. I had no appetite. I drank water. I texted my boss and I was like, hey, good morning. Guess what? I'm in the hospital, blah, blah, blah. She was really cool. She was like, make sure they give you good drugs. I was like, oh, I will. I was like, but I don't know when I'm getting out of here. She was like, well, don't worry about that. Just do what they say. So that was a relief to some degree. But I'm sitting there. I'm still in the friggin' hallway. Eventually this doctor comes by with an intern, and he's like, "I'm Dr. So and so. This is my intern. We're gonna, she's just kind of shadowing me so she can learn about all this stuff." She was like, and then he was like, "Can you tell me what happened?" So I was like, "Well, I was home, blah blah blah. I had this pain, and then it was shooting down my arm, so I came in." He's like, "Okay," and he's like, "So what did you have? What about your head, your brain trauma?" I was like, "Nothing's wrong with my head." The intern's like, "You're not 58 years old," and I'm like, "No, I'm not." And she looks at him. She's like, "We've got the wrong patient." He's like, "Oh, sorry, never mind, bye." So they leave, and I'm like, "What the fuck? What?" So, so there I am, still in the hallway, and not really getting much information. I'm starting to get a little tired, and I'm like, "What's going on? What's happening?" They're still taking my blood. Eventually, I mean, I was there all day, so I had gotten there at about 1 a.m. It wasn't until 10 p.m. the next day that they were like, "We've got a room, we're going to take you up." So somebody came and took me to a room, and I was like, "Yes." In the room, I had a roommate. He looked, when I got in there, it was late at night, so I couldn't really see, and he was kind of asleep. It looked like a child, and I was like, "Oh, the worst thing I want to see in the hospital. I don't want to see sick kids. I don't know why. I just can't. That's like devastating to me." So, there's this kid lying there, and he's just really small, and he's not really saying anything, but he's got this TV going, and he's got like some gangsta movie playing with just people talking shit and whatever. So I'm like, all right. So they get me in there. I think I finally get some sleep because it's dark, but I can hear his TV going the whole time. Wake up the next morning, my roommate is screaming in another language about the pain that he's in. He is not a kid, he's an adult, and he's screaming, and nothing's happening. So he's like, "Ah," and I'm like, "What the fuck?" Eventually, like 20 minutes later, the nurses and the staff come in, and they're like, "We got to get him to a room closer to our station so that we can hear this, because we didn't even hear it." I'm like, "Okay." And they're like, "We're going to have to move you to get him out, because apparently these rooms are not built for two people." I don't know if this is a COVID thing or not. So they had to like angle my bed to get him angled out. I'm like, whatever, just get him out of here, because he's screaming and yelling, and it's horrible. So they get him out, they move me around, and then I'm there. I'm like, "Oh, I got the place to myself." A cardiologist comes in. He's like, "Here's what's going to happen." He's like, "Your cardiac enzyme levels should be at like," I think he said like, normal levels in the blood are like 40 to 50. He's like, "Yours are like 400. I was like, "Oh." He's like, "Yeah, that's not good." He's like, "What we're going to do late," and he's like, "I'm trying to schedule this for later today. We're going to do an angiogram. We're going to go in through your wrist. We're going to go in, look at the heart. What I think is happening is one of your, there's an artery or something in your heart that's closed off, that caused this. If that's the case, we're going to do a stent. We're going to put that in there while we're in there. It's not really that invasive. We'll get it taken care of, and you should be fine." But he's like, "I want to get that looked at today." He's like, "So don't eat anything." And I'm like, "I don't really want to eat anything here." And he's like, "Good." He's like, "Don't drink anything." I was like, "Even water?" He's like, No. So he's like, "I'm going to try to schedule this for 3 p.m. today." I'm like, "Okay, good." So I'm just in my room all by myself, and I'm like, "Okay." I've got they did bring me breakfast, and it stank, and I was like, I'm not going to eat it anyway. But so it was sitting there. And then at some point, they're like, "We got to get you out of here." because we have a patient with COVID and they need this room. So we're going to take you down to another room. I was like, okay. So they angle me out down the hallway into a room with a guy who was not doing too well, but it was very nice. But they had to move him out of the way to get me past him to get my bed in. So they got me in, and nobody says anything about like, okay, you're going in at 3:00 for this surgery. So nobody really says anything. And I'm like, do they know that I've switched rooms? Do they know this and that? 3:00 comes around. Nobody's saying anything. 3:30, 3:45. And I'm like, it's 4:00 and I haven't heard anything. So I hit the button and I'm like, hi, I think I'm supposed to be in surgery at 3, and nobody's come. And like, throughout this, my anxiety is through the roof, like at levels I've never felt. So this, I'm not there at 3:00. It has me like panicking like a motherfucker. And so I'm like, what's happening? Why is nobody, like, this hospital, do they know that I'm here? Do they know? They're like, I don't know, we'll check on it. And I'm like, okay, thanks. While I'm sitting there in my new room, I'm hearing people down the hall. I'm hearing a woman screaming and like, oh, I'm gonna shit on the floor. Oh, this hospital is the worst. Oh, they don't care. I'm gonna shit on the floor. And then some guy every like 5 seconds just starts, oh, screaming. So I'm like, what the fuck? Where am I? Is this hell? And I'm freaking out because I'm like, I'm supposed to be doing something and I don't know if they know that I'm supposed to be. Thankfully, at like 5, two younger men and a woman come in and they're like, hey, are you Adam? I'm like, yeah. They're like, hey, we're gonna take you back. And I was like, yeah, what's I thought I was supposed to go in at 3. They were like, yeah, well, this is, we had some other surgeries we had to do that were kind of big time, that took longer than expected. That's kind of what happens. I was like, it'd be nice if somebody had told me that, but I'm glad you're here. They were awesome. They were the first people who clearly knew what the fuck they were doing. So they had to angle me out. They had to angle my roommate so that they could get me out again. I'm like, whatever. So they get me back to this operating room, and they're doing all kinds of stuff, and they're slathering this, and they got music playing, and I'm like, these people are good. They've got the radio playing, and there's a song on, and they're like, what is this song? And I'm like, I know. And they're like, what? And I'm like, it's Alice in Chains' Rooster. They're like, oh, awesome, you knew that? And I was like, yeah, I'm old, I know these 90s songs. They're like, okay, cool. So like, we were good after that. But they were like, dude, you look really friggin' nervous. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really know what's happening here. They're like, don't worry about it. We're going to take care of you. We're going to get you some drugs to make you feel better. And I'm like, okay. I'm not hurting, so I don't really need drugs. But then one of the people put this thing in my wrist here, which hurt. He's like, this is the line, we're gonna feed this in. And then the woman was like, I'm gonna get you drugs, I'm getting you fentanyl. And I'm like, okay. So I'm just sitting there, and they're like shaving me. And well, actually, let me back up. There are 2 ways that they can do angiograms. They can go in through the wrist, but mostly since most of the patients are older, they go in through the groin. So they're like, we think we can go in through your wrist. I'm like, okay, good. Then a nurse had come into my room, handed me a razor, and was like, can you shave your own private area? I'm like, okay. So I had to like buzz myself completely like a porn star. And And I was like, okay, I'm done. They didn't need to go in through there. They did go in through my wrist. And it hurt, but they did get the drug in. And then I'm lying there, and I just remember things were happening, and I was kind of conscious, and I'm like, and then I see the cardiologist came in. He was like, look at that screen to your left. I'm like, uh-huh. He's like, see, I was right. He was like, this is completely blocked. We've put in this stent, so you should be good now. And I'm like, okay. I still really have no idea what the fuck is happening. But they're like, we're all done. I'm like, oh, okay. So they start unwrapping whatever they had wrapped me in, and I remember I was coming out of it. I was feeling a little buzz, but at the same time, my arm really hurt, like here. And they had like this surfboard on my arm on both sides that was crushing, where they had injected the line into my wrist, but it was being pushed by this like tight surfboard vice grip thing. And I was like, oh, this really fucking hurts. And the woman's like, oh, I'll give you more fentanyl. I'm like, okay. So she's getting me all kinds of drugs before they wheel me back to my room. And so they do, and I'm like high as a kite, but my wrist still hurts. I'm like, oh. So I get back to the room, and the nurse on duty was the guy who was like, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm hurting really badly. This wrist hurts. He's like, oh, I'll get you some drugs to help with that. So he gets me drugs, and I'm like high as a kite, tired. Nothing hurts in here. It's all this, just hurting. And there's blood caked all over the place. So I can see that like they had gone in and like blood was pouring out. But it was crushing. It was like, ah. So that hurt more than anything that I had gone through up to this point. It hurt like a bastard. So I get more drugs. So I've already got fentanyl in my system, like double dose fentanyl. I've got whatever this nurse is giving me. So by nighttime, I am high as a kite. I'm listening to music on my on my iPhone, and I'm just like, ugh. So I kind of am in a blissful euphoria, but at the same time, I'm like, my wrist hurts. All night they're coming in, taking blood. That's the problem. Every 2 hours while you're sleeping, they're taking blood. You would think, like, getting blood taken from you should get used to it, I guess. But the more I did it, the worse it felt, and the worse I looked towards it. I was like, oh. Like airplanes, I don't really like flying, but if I have to fly, the first flight, it's kind of like, but then I kind of get used to it. It was like getting worse and worse. But thankfully, I was high as a kite on all kinds of pain medication, because the last woman who came in at like 3 a.m. couldn't find a vein so she's like doing all kinds of stuff, and I was like, and it didn't freak me out, but like I can't even, I'm cringing just thinking about having blood taken from me, and I have to go next week and get more blood taken from me. So yeah, not pleasant, horrible feeling. Woke up the next day, and my wrist was really painful, to the point where I became the screaming patient in the hospital who was like, I'm hitting the button. I'm like, please help. And then the nurse comes in and is like, here's more drugs. I'm like, oh, thanks. So I'm like, my cardiologist eventually comes in. Was like, how are you? And I'm like, my arm is killing me. He's like, why is this thing still on you? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, they should have taken this off you right after we were finished with you. He's like, I'll make sure that they get this off of you. I'm like, oh, it hurts so bad. Crazy pain. He's like, so what happened was you had a mild heart attack. He's like, if you hadn't have come in here in a couple days, you would have had a massive heart attack and probably died. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, so it's a good thing that you're here. He's like, we've got this. We put the stent in and you're going to be fine. He's like, there are certain steps you're going to have to take over the next few weeks, but you're going to be fine, back to normal, whatever. I still just couldn't process it all. He's like, but you can go home today. I'm like, oh, okay. Trying to like pass this information on to my family was weird, because it was mostly like, I wasn't feeling well and I came to the hospital. They want to keep me here, but I feel great, because I wasn't hurting after. All the chest stuff was gone as soon as I got there. The worst pain I felt was from the wrist thing. Eventually, and it did take some time, they came in and removed the thing from my wrist, and I was like, oh, I felt so much better. But the problem was they'd given me so many doses of pain medication that by the time it was time for me to get out of the hospital and come back home, I was like really depressed and anxious, because I didn't have the pain medication. It wore off, and I wasn't really processing what had happened. So it was like, I should be happy that I'm home, but I'm like, as soon as I got discharged, this is horrible. I was hungry. I was like, I need to have a cheesesteak. I hadn't eaten in a few days. I probably should not be eating cheesesteaks anymore because it's bad for my heart. But prior to this, I have never been in better shape in my life. I've never eaten healthier. I've never been healthier. I was doing cardio at the gym, which I never had really done. And yet I had this happen. So I'm like, that's not fair. I'm like, I just want a cheesesteak. So as soon as I got out, Denise and I went and I got a cheesesteak. And it was fucking great. So I got home and it was just hard. It was hard seeing family concerned, because they almost lost me, and it took me a while to deal with what had happened, and I don't even know if I really dealt with it completely, but I had to take some time off work to recover physically, but really it was mentally that the problems happened. I was depressed. The anxiety was through the roof. I started on this regimen of all this medication for all of it, and I was having these weird side effects, and I was having these like false feelings, like, is something wrong with my heart, is something wrong with my chest. I was getting tired. It was all just a mind fuck, really. But what helped was I did go in for a stress test so they could take a look and see what was happening. Because when you're in the best shape of your life and this happens, it makes sense that you would be scared. Like, who knows? Every little thing could be something bad. And that's kind of where I had been for the rest of this year. So I took some time off of work to recover and did a lot of sleeping. I did go to the gym a lot. Some of the medication that I'm on makes me bruise easily because it's blood thinner, so I have like bruises that pop up. But I'm feeling better than I was, but this is getting old. This is just part of the process. It's kind of fucked up. within the last couple weeks, I mean, this is months ago. So within the last couple weeks, Laser's been asking me about like what happened, and it just doesn't seem real to me. And it was kind of scary because he was kind of scared. He was like, how bad were you, and how bad was, and I don't really know what to say, because I don't really understand it. And I don't know why this happened. They said it was like a genetic thing. We've never had heart attacks. We've had strokes in my family, but we never had heart attacks this young like I did. So there's part of me that's become paranoid about, was it that I got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for my first dose for COVID? Did that somehow affect me? I don't know. I'm not going full anti-vax, but I'm cautious, and I'm like, I don't know. But that's what I've been going through. That's what I went through. It's been interesting. I'm old. I'm getting old, but goddamn, I look good. No. So I hope this was in some way entertaining and informative. I have a cardiologist now. I'm on all kinds of weird old people drugs because that's what I do. I should be fine. Everything looks good. I'm going to have blood work done next week with my primary care physician, which she's a whole other story because that's another video. But we'll see. The blood work will be helpful to me, I think, mentally, just to make sure everything's okay. But I feel good, and I look good. And I don't know. I don't know why I did this, but I love you. Thanks. Bye.